Humanity has always feared the dark, but what we fear even more is what crawls out of it on four legs. You know the Hollywood version of the werewolf? Full moon, silver bullet, the hairy kid in a high school jacket. Well, forget all that. Those stories are a shield, a desperate comfort meant to keep us from looking too closely at the historical records. The beast watching you from beyond the tree line wasn't bitten and infected. It isn't sick. It wanted this curse. It literally cast its soul aside for the thrill of the hunt and the raw power of the beast. And that hide it's wearing on its back? You'll be shocked to find out where that thing came from. Welcome back to Chilled Bones. I'm Robert Ference, writer and self-proclaimed raconteur of high strangeness. Tonight, we're tracing a phenomenon that has haunted humanity for centuries, taking you from the familiar surface of pop culture down to the deepest, darkest depths of global folklore and real-world history. For thousands of years, every culture on Earth has shared a single waking nightmare, the shapeshifter. In Europe, they called it a werewolf, a symbol of feral rage, infernal pacts with the devil, or a tragic, infectious curse that strips a person of their soul. But as we cross the oceans and dig beneath the surface of history, the nature of the beast changes. It evolves from a helpless victim, chained to the mercy of a full moon, into something far more calculated. A creature of pure intent, a human who willingly traded their soul for absolute animalistic power. To understand what's really out there, we have to look past the cinema screens and campfire tropes. We're diving into 16th century trial transcripts where men swore under oath that they dressed in wolf pelts while they hunted human prey. We're examining terrifying psychological disorders where human minds genuinely fractured into beastly madness. And ultimately, we will reach into the lowest depths of North American indigenous traditions, where the shapeshifter isn't a movie monster, but a deeply feared, active, spiritual reality. Now, let's dive into Tier 1 and see what this is all about. Tier 1, the surface. To begin our descent, we have to start at the surface, the shallow, sunlit water where the myths are familiar, comfortable, and neatly packaged. Here, the shapeshifter is a monster we think we understand. It's a creature of late-night cinema, horror novels, and childhood campfire tales. But even here, in the relative safety of the light, the roots of these stories are darker, stranger, and far more manipulative than they appear. The Hollywood Curse. Close your eyes and think of a werewolf. Almost instantly, your mind conjures a very specific, highly standardized set of rules. You see a helpless victim, bitten under the cover of darkness by a slavering beast. You see them looking up at the night sky as a pale full moon breaks through the clouds. Suddenly, their bones begin to snap and reform. Their skin splits as coarse dark hair erupts from their flesh. They scream, a sound that morphs from a human cry of agony into a blood-curdling howl. They've become a creature of pure mindless feral instinct, driven to slaughter anyone they can catch and sink their teeth into. Next morning, they wake up naked in the dirt, covered in blood, weeping with no memory of the horrors they committed the night before. And no, I am not talking about your bachelor party. Of course, you know the only cure. The only way to put this tragic soul out of their misery is a silver bullet, forged in purity, delivered straight to the heart. It's a perfect tragedy. But there's a secret behind this myth that not many people are aware of. Almost none of it is ancient. If you were to travel back to medieval Europe and talk to a peasant about a werewolf, They would have no idea what you meant by a silver bullet or a full moon. In historical folklore, lycanthropy was not an infectious disease passed on by a bite like rabies. It was an act of black magic, a divine punishment from God, or a voluntary pact with the devil. A werewolf could transform at 3 o'clock on a sunny Tuesday afternoon if they wanted to. They didn't need to wait for the moon. They just needed a magic belt made of wolfskin, a cursed ointment rubbed under their armpits. Gross. Or a simple, wicked desire to taste human flesh. So, where did our modern rules come from? The answer lies in the smoke-filled writers' rooms of early 20th century Hollywood, and specifically in the mind of a Jewish-German screenwriter named Kurt Siodmak. In 1941, Siodmak wrote the screenplay for Universal Pictures' classic film The Wolfman, starring Lon Chaney Jr. Siodmak wasn't just trying to write a scary movie. He was a Jewish man who had recently fled Nazi Germany. And he was deeply traumatized by how quickly his former neighbors, ordinary decent people, had transformed into mindless, violent beasts under the sway of a hateful ideology. To cope with his trauma, Siodmak invented a mythology. He wrote this famous poem, which you know. Every man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. He invented the silver bullet as a metaphor for the only thing that could stop an otherwise unstoppable evil, and he invented the pentagram appearing on the victim's palm as a symbol of being marked by destiny. Hollywood took a chaotic, terrifyingly unpredictable, and deeply spiritual piece of global folklore and sanitized it into an infection story. They turned a willing practitioner of dark magic into a tragic victim of circumstance. It was a way to make the monster palatable, safe, and easily understood by a modern audience. We wanted to believe the monster was a victim, because if the monster is a victim, then maybe we can save him. But as we drop deeper into the iceberg, we find that history's real beasts didn't want to be saved, and they didn't wait for a full moon to hunt. The Beast of Gévaudan, 1764 to 1767. To understand just how terrifyingly real the fear of the shapeshifter can be, we have to travel back to the mid-18th century, to the rugged, mountainous forests of the Gévaudan region in south-central France. This was the land of quiet valleys, isolated stone cottages, and deep silent woods. But in the summer of 1764, the silence was shattered by screams. It began with a young woman who was tending cattle in the Mercari forest. Out of the trees emerged a massive, wolf-like creature, bounding directly toward her. Unlike a normal wolf, which would easily be deterred by a shouting human, this creature was focused entirely on her. It bypassed the cattle, aiming straight for her and her throat. She only survived because the bulls in the pasture stepped up and charged the beast, using their horns to drive it back into the shadows of the forest. She was the lucky one, because over the next 3 years, this entity, which the local peasants simply called La Bête, or the Beast, would wage a relentless, blood-soaked campaign of terror that would capture the attention of all of Europe. The attacks were calculated, brutal, and horrifyingly frequent. The beast didn't hunt like a normal predator, didn't stalk weak, elderly sheep. It targeted humans, specifically women and children tending flocks in isolation. And it didn't merely kill to eat. It seemed to take a sadistic pleasure in the act. Victims were often found decapitated, their heads severed with surgical precision, their bodies horribly mutilated, sometimes with their clothes neatly laid out beside them. Witnesses who survived the encounters described an animal that defied classification. It was said to be the size of a donkey or a calf, with reddish-brown fur, a dark stripe running down its spine, a wide chest, and a tail that ended in a tuft of hair like a lion's. But here's what truly terrified those who saw its face. It had a long, narrow snout, small pointed ears, and eyes that burned with a sickening, cold, human-like intelligence. It was also capable of leaping distances of up to 30 feet in a single bound, and it seemed entirely immune to gunfire. Multiple hunters reported shooting the beast at point-blank range, only to watch it shake its head, growl, and trot back into the tree line, completely unfazed by their bullets. The terror in Gévaudan grew so severe that it triggered a national crisis. The local economy ground to a halt, peasants refused to leave their homes, and children were no longer sent out to tend the livestock. The news eventually reached the ears of King Louis XV in Versailles. Embarrassed that a single animal was defying his kingdom, the king dispatched his own royal gun-bearer, along with a small army of professional wolf hunters, soldiers, and bloodhounds to scour the mountains and the countryside. They killed over 100 wolves in the region, declaring the beast dead on multiple occasions. Yet, as soon as the soldiers packed their bags and left, the mutilations would begin again. As the body count climbed past 115, the local population came to a terrifying conclusion. This was no ordinary wolf. It had to be a loup-garou, a werewolf, a creature of dark magic, perhaps controlled by a local madman or a cursed hermit living up in the hills somewhere. The nightmare finally came to an end on June 19th, 1767. A local hunter named Jean Chastil was participating in a massive community-organized hunt. According to legend, Chastil, a deeply religious man, sat down in a clearing and began reading his Bible. He also believed that ordinary steel and lead could not harm a creature of the devil, so he had melted down a silver medallion of the Virgin Mary to forge his own custom bullets. As Chastil sat reading the Bible, the beast suddenly emerged from the thicket. Strangely, it didn't charge, just stood there, staring at him, as if it recognized him. Chastil calmly finished his prayer, closed his book, took aim, and fired. By my accounts, that action would have probably taken 10 minutes. But that's just how the story goes. The beast collapsed and died. When they cut open its stomach, the horror was confirmed. The undigested collarbone of a young girl was found inside. The body of the beast was stuffed and sent to Paris to be shown to the king, but by the time it arrived, the poorly preserved carcass was so rotted and so foul-smelling that the king wouldn't go near it. He instead ordered it to be buried in an unmarked grave. To this day, science can't agree on what the Beast of Gévaudan actually was. Was it an escaped exotic animal like a hyena or something imported by a wealthy aristocrat who trained it to hunt humans? Was it a prehistoric survivor? A lingering remnant of a bygone era? Or was it, as the terrified peasants of Gévaudan whispered to their children in the dark, a man who had found a way to turn himself into a wolf? The Modern Dogman. You might think that belief in a giant wolf-like beast died out with the arrival of the modern world. We have electricity, satellite imaging, the internet. We have YouTube. Surely there's no room left for a wolfman in the 21st century. But if you look closely at modern internet forums, or read through anonymous police reports, or talk to people who live on the edges of America's vast national forests, you will find that the beast is still very much alive. It simply changed its name. Today, they call it the Dogman. Unlike the traditional werewolf, The Dogman is not a human who undergoes an agonizing transformation under a full moon. It's described as a permanent physical cryptid, a 7 to 8 foot tall bipedal canine. Those who have encountered it describe a creature with legs of a wolf bent backwards at the hock, but with a massive muscular torso resembling a bodybuilder. Its arms are long, ending in three-toed paws with razor-sharp black claws that function almost like human hands. And sitting on top of this terrifying frame is the head of an oversized German shepherd or a wolf, but with erect pointed ears and a jaw full of interlocking yellow fangs. The modern wave of sightings began in earnest in 1987 in Wexford County, Michigan. A popular local radio DJ named Steve Cook decided to record a song called The Legend as an April Fool's Day prank. The song, set to a haunting acoustic melody, detailed various historical accounts of half-man, half-dog creatures spotted in the Michigan wilderness, dating all the way back to the French fur trappers in the 1800s. The song warned that the beast returned every 10 years, in a year ending in the number 7. Cook assumed the song would be fun, a temporary gag, but as soon as the track finished playing, the radio station's phones lit up, and they didn't stop ringing for weeks. These weren't pranksters playing along with the joke. These were terrified callers, hunters, farmers, state troopers, and even utility workers, who were angry that Cook was singing about something they had spent years trying to forget. They began sharing their own deeply unsettling, highly consistent encounters. One caller described driving down a dirt road late at night when their headlights illuminated what they thought was a massive deer standing on his hind legs by a trash can. As they got closer, the creature turned. It was a wolf, but it was standing completely upright, balancing effortlessly. It didn't turn and run away like any other animal would. It stared directly into the windshield with flat, cold eyes, slowly bared its teeth, took a step towards the car before the driver slammed on the gas. But the most disturbing accounts of the Dogman don't come from Michigan. They come from a dark, dense stretch of wilderness nestled between Kentucky and Tennessee, a place known as the Land Between the Lakes, or LBL. LBL is an outdoor recreation area spanning over 170,000 acres of undeveloped forest, water, and marshland. It's beautiful by day, but by night it's pitch black and deeply isolating. For decades, locals have whispered about a legendary mass murder that allegedly took place there in the early 1980s. According to the story, a young family of 4 had parked their RV in a remote, unauthorized campsite deep within the LBL woods. Late that night, the local sheriff's department received a frantic, garbled call about an animal attack. When the deputies arrived at the campsite, they found a scene of absolute carnage. The metal door of the RV had been violently ripped off its hinges. Inside, the bodies of the father and mother were found, torn apart with a savagery that no normal black bear or cougar could achieve. When the deputies searched the surrounding woods with flashlights, they found the youngest child, a little girl, suspended high up in the branches of a tree, dead, having been dragged up there by a predator. But the most chilling detail of the story, the one that the police department allegedly hushed up, came from a young deputy who claimed that as they were recovering the bodies, they caught a glimpse of the killer in the darkness. It was a massive, wolf-like creature standing on 2 legs, watching the police lights flash from the shadows of the tree line. Didn't make a sound, simply turned and melted into the deep woods with a speed that seemed physically impossible. Whether the Land Between the Lakes massacre is an urban legend or a carefully guarded secret, encounters and sightings continue to pour into this day, and they all share one common, deeply haunting detail. When people lock eyes with a grizzly bear or a mountain lion, They feel a natural evolutionary fear of a predator. But when people lock into the eyes of a dogman, they feel something entirely different. They describe a sickening sensation of recognition. They don't see the blank, wild gaze of a beast driven by hunger. They see an intense, ancient, and highly malicious intelligence. They see a mind that knows exactly what it's doing, a creature that is choosing to hunt them, not for food, but for the sheer pleasure of the chase. As we prepare to leave the surface, the safety of Hollywood metaphors and internet cryptid forums begin to fade. We are dropping down into Tier 2, the shallows. Here, we leave behind the modern campfire ghost stories and enter the dusty, blood-stained courtrooms of early Europe. We're going to look at actual historical legal transcripts where the belief in real flesh and blood shapeshifters was so absolute and so terrifying that it drove entire communities to commit acts of unthinkable violence, torture, and madness. The water is becoming increasingly colder, my friends. Before we descend any further into this mammoth iceberg, take a quick second to hit that like and subscribe button and join our growing community here at Chilled Bones. And if you're interested in the strange and macabre, which I know you are, check out my horror novels. I've written several of them. You can find out more about them at chilledbones.com. Every book is written with the guarantee that you'll spend sleepless nights with the lights on. Now, on to Tier 2. Tier 2, the shallows. We're now crossing over the threshold into the shallows. The water is growing noticeably colder, and the light from the surface is beginning to dim. Up there, we could tell ourselves that these monsters were just special effects, urban legends, or misidentified wildlife. Down here in Tier 2, we find ourselves standing in the cold, damp stone courtrooms of 16th and 17th century Europe. Here, the werewolf was not a myth. It was a legal reality. It was an existential threat, prosecuted with the same critical, bureaucratic ruthlessness as theft or murder. To these societies, the beast was not a metaphor. It was a neighbor who had made a deal with the devil. The Werewolf of Bedburg, Peter Stump, 1589. To understand how deep this terror ran, we have to travel to the small rural town of Bedburg, Germany in the year 1589. The town was gripped by a suffocating fear. For over 20 years, a phantom killer had been stalking the countryside. Cattle were found slaughtered in the pastures, their throats torn open and their internal organs systematically consumed. But soon, the hunger of the beast turned to human flesh. Pregnant women were dragged into the woods, their unborn ripped from their bodies, young children vanished from their beds, only for their gnawed, shattered bones to be discovered in the fields weeks later. The terrified villagers whispered of a giant, ravenous wolf with burning eyes and a massive jaw. They organized armed search parties, scouring the dense forest with rifles and hunting dogs. Then, one evening, a group of armed guards cornered a massive wolf in a clearing. They unleashed their hounds, surrounding the beast, but as the men closed in with their weapons, they witnessed something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The wolf didn't fight. Instead, right before their eyes, the coarse fur began to recede. The paws reformed into hands. The snout shrank back into a human face. Standing before them in the moonlight was not a wild beast, but Peter Stump, a wealthy, highly respected farmer of their own community. Stump was immediately arrested and thrown into the deepest dungeon, where he was subjected to the most horrific torture methods of the era. Under the weight of the rack and burning pincers, Stump confessed everything. He claimed that since the age of 12, he had practiced black magic. He said the devil had gifted him a magical cursed belt made of wolf skin. When he strapped this belt around his waist, he transformed instantly into a giant, ravenous wolf, possessed with the strength of 10 men and an insatiable craving for human flesh. He confessed to murdering 16 people, including his own son, whose brain he admitted to eating. On October 31st, 1589, Peter Stump was subjected to one of the most brutal executions in recorded history. He was strapped to a wooden wheel, where executioners tore the flesh from his bones with red-hot pincers. His arms and legs were shattered with an axe, his head was chopped off, and his body was burned to ash alongside his mistress and his daughter, who were accused of helping him to hide his crimes. To this day, historians look at the trial of Peter Stump with a mix of horror and skepticism. Was Stump truly a sadistic serial killer who used the local werewolf mythology to mask his horrific crimes? Or was he a victim of political and religious persecution during the chaotic Protestant Reformation, tortured into confessing into impossible supernatural acts so the local government could seize his land? Regardless of the truth, the execution of Peter Stump proved one thing. In the 16th century, the Wolfman was real enough. Clinical lycanthropy. But what if the transformation isn't a physical one? What if the monster doesn't wear a skin of fur, but instead constructs a cage inside the human mind? This is the terrifying reality of clinical lycanthropy, a rare, profoundly unsettling psychiatric condition that exists at the intersection of schizophrenia, severe depression, and neurological dysfunction. Those who suffer from this delusion do not merely think they can transform into animals. They experience it with every single one of their senses. In psychiatric literature, patients suffering from clinical lycanthropy describe experiencing agonizing physical changes. They look at their hands and watch their fingernails blacken, harden, and lengthen into razor-sharp claws. They feel coarse, bristling hair erupting from their forearms, growing backwards beneath their skin. They feel their jaw aching as their teeth supposedly sharpen and slide past one another like interlocking shears. To the patient, this transformation is completely physically real. In one historical psychiatric case from the 19th century, a man was admitted to an asylum claiming he was a wolf. He refused to eat cooked food, demanding raw, blood-soaked meat, which he would drag onto the floor and tear apart with his teeth. He spent his nights pacing the perimeter of his cell, howling at the window, and attempting to scratch through the stone walls until his fingers were bloody and raw. When doctors tried to examine him, he warned them to stay back, snarling that his skin was merely a disguise, and that if they cut him open, they would find he was actually hairy on the inside. Modern neuroscience suggests that clinical lycanthropy may be caused by a profound malfunction in the brain's parietal lobe, the area responsible for creating our body map, the internal blueprint that tells our brain where our limbs are and what shape they should be. When this blueprint is corrupted, the brain can misinterpret physical sensations, convincing the mind that the human body has warped into something predatory and feral. It's a sobering thought. You don't need a magic belt or a curse from a witch to become a beast. Sometimes all it takes is a single broken connection deep within your own brain. The Benandanti. While most of European history treats the shapeshifter as a demonic curse or a sign of utter moral corruption, There is one bizarre, fascinating exception hidden in the dusty archives of the Inquisition in northern Italy. This is the story of the Benandanti, a term that translates to the good walkers. In the 16th and 17th centuries, in the remote mountainous region of Friuli, Italy, certain children were born with a caul, a rare portion of the amniotic sac still covering their head or face at birth. To the local peasants, this was a sign of a powerful spiritual destiny. As these children grew into adulthood, they were initiated into a secret, highly protective agrarian cult. The Benandanti claimed that 4 times a year, during the Ember Days, weeks of fasting and prayer marking the changing of the seasons, that their spirits would leave their physical bodies while they slept. They didn't fly away on broomsticks. Instead, they claimed that their souls transformed into wolves. According to their testimonies to the Roman Inquisition, these wolves of God would run together in massive spiritual pacts, traveling to the underworld or to the edge of the sky. Their mission? To wage brutal, unseen wars against local witches and demons. The witches fought with stalks of sorghum, while the Benandanti, in their wolf forms, fought with stalks of fennel. If the Benandanti won the battle, the region would enjoy a bountiful harvest. If they lost, the witches would ruin the crops, bringing famine, plague, and death to the community. For decades, the Catholic inquisitors were utterly baffled by the Benandanti. They had arrived in Friuli expecting to find devil-worshipping witches, but instead, they found a group of peasants who claimed they were transforming into wolves specifically to protect the church, the community, and the crops. They didn't want to hurt anyone, claiming their shapeshifting was a divine holy duty. Eventually, the pressure of the Inquisition wore them down. Over generations of interrogation and threats of torture, the Benandanti were forced to confess that their night walks were indeed heretical, and the unique protective wolf lore of Friuli was systematically erased, replaced by standard confessions of witchcraft. But the legend of the Benandanti stands as a haunting reminder of a time when the wolf in the dark wasn't always hunting you. Sometimes it was fighting to keep you alive. We've reached the end of the shallows. The historical courtrooms of Europe are fading behind us, swallowed by the cold, dark water. We are now descending into Tier 3, the dark zone. As we cross the Atlantic Ocean, we leave behind the old world courts and enter the vast, ancient, and silent forests of early North America. Here, early settlers, fur trappers, and indigenous cultures encountered things in the deep woods that defied the laws of nature. Things that didn't just want to scare you, they wanted to consume your very soul. The pressure is rising the further we descend. Tier 3, the dark zone. The light of historical Europe has completely vanished. The water around us is now black, heavy, and silent. We have crossed the Atlantic Ocean to descend into Tier 3, the dark zone. Here, we find ourselves standing in the vast, claustrophobic wilderness of early North America. To the early European settlers, fur trappers, and miners, this continent was an endless, untamed expanse of shadow. The forests were too dense, the winters were too brutal, and the silence was too absolute. In this frontier, they quickly realized that the rules of the old world did not apply. They were sharing the woods with ancient, hungry forces that didn't just want to take their lives, they wanted to strip away their humanity and consume their souls. Wendigo Psychosis. To understand the psychological dread of the North American winter, we have to look at the subarctic forests of Canada and the Great Lakes region. In the folklore of the Algonquin-speaking peoples, there is no monster more feared than the Wendigo. The Wendigo is not a physical beast born in the wild. It is a malevolent, cannibalistic spirit associated with famine, greed, and the crushing, freezing darkness of winter. According to legend, the Wendigo was once a human, but when faced with starvation in the deep winter, they committed the ultimate taboo. They ate the flesh of another human to survive. In doing so, their soul was corrupted. They grew to a monstrous height. Their skin turned ash gray and tightly bound to their bones. Their lips decayed away, leaving jagged, exposed teeth. And they were cursed with an insatiable, agonizing hunger for human flesh. The more they ate, the larger and hungrier they became. But the true horror of this legend isn't the physical monster. It's a historical documented psychological phenomenon known to modern science as Wendigo Psychosis. During the harsh winters of the 18th and 19th centuries, isolated native communities and fur-trapping outposts would find themselves completely cut off from the world by feet of heavy snow. Rations would dwindle to nothing, wild game would vanish, and the wind would howl outside the cabin walls for weeks on end. In this suffocating isolation, a person's mind would begin to unravel. They would start experiencing severe paranoia, hallucinations, and a profound, terrifying sensation of cold within their own chest. Soon, their perception of their family and friends would warp. They would look at their spouse or their children, and they would no longer see people. They would see meat. They would then experience an overwhelming, obsessive urge to kill and consume them. There are dozens of chilling historical accounts of this psychosis taking hold. One of the most infamous occurred in 1878, involving a Cree hunter named Swift Runner. Swift Runner was a respected family man and a guide for the Northwest Mounted Police. But during a devastatingly brutal winter, he and his family found themselves trapped in their camp, starving. When Swift Runner finally emerged from the woods alone and traveled to a nearby Hudson's Bay Company post, locals noticed he seemed physically healthy, well-nourished, deeply agitated. Suspicious, the authorities went to investigate his camp. What they found was an absolute nightmare. Swift Runner had systematically slaughtered and eaten his wife, his 6 children, his mother, and his brother. Even though emergency rations were available nearby, his mind had been completely consumed by the delusion of the Wendigo. He was tried, convicted, and executed. But before his death, he insisted that he was no longer Swift Runner. He claimed the spirit of the winter beast had taken up residence inside his chest, and he had simply lost the strength to fight it. The Skinwalker. As European settlers, miners, and homesteaders pushed west into the rugged deserts and canyons of the American Southwest, they began to encounter a brand of terror they had never experienced back in Europe. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, diaries and frontier newspapers began recording bizarre encounters. Travelers on horseback or in covered wagons reported being stalked by strange, emaciated figures running alongside them. These figures didn't look like wolves, coyotes, or even men. They looked like a horrific, shifting combination of all three. They could run at speeds of 30 or 40 miles an hour, keeping pace with galloping horses without breaking a sweat, before suddenly leaping over boulders or disappearing into the rocky canyon walls. The settlers, lacking the cultural vocabulary to understand what they were seeing, began calling these things feral humans, or Indian devils. They assumed they were dealing with a physical wild animal or a crazed hermit wearing animal hides. But this is where we encounter a different kind of horror. The modern digital distortion of a sacred and feared cultural reality. In the 21st century, the term Skinwalker has exploded across internet forums, TikTok, and YouTube. It has been turned into a generic sensationalized internet monster. Online creepypastas depict the Skinwalker as a generic, pale, flesh-colored cryptid with hollow eyes who mimics human voices to lure victims into the woods, or a mutant coyote that stands on its hind legs. But this modern internet myth has completely stripped away the actual terrifying context of the legend. By turning the Skinwalker into a mindless forest monster or a cool sci-fi alien, pop culture has erased the core of the horror. As we will see in the next tier, the true entity is not a wild animal, a glitch in the matrix, or a cryptid. It is something far closer to home. It's a human being who has willingly traded their soul, their family, and their humanity for the power to become a predator. The internet wants to believe the monster is a wild beast in the woods. The truth is, the monster is sitting right next to you at the campfire. The Stikini. To close out the Dark Zone, we have to travel south into the hot, humid, and oppressive swamps of the Florida Everglades. Here, within the folklore of the Seminole people, hides one of the most grotesque and visceral shapeshifters in global mythology, the Stikini. At first glance, the Stikini appears to be an ordinary member of the community. They walk among the living by day, share meals, laughing, and working alongside their neighbors. But in actuality, they are powerful, malevolent witches who harbor a dark, secret dependency on human flesh to sustain their unnatural lives. When night falls, the Stikini must feed, but they cannot do so in their human form. To transform, the witch must retreat deep into the pitch-black swamps, away from all human eyes. There, they perform a horrifying physical ritual. They begin to retch and choke, violently forcing their own internal organs out of their throat. They vomit up their heart, their lungs, their liver, and their stomach, hanging them carefully on the branches of a nearby cypress tree. Once their physical body is completely hollowed out of its humanity, their flesh warps. They shrink, sprout feathers, and transform into a monstrous, oversized owl with glowing, blood-red eyes. The Stikini then takes to the night sky, flying silently over the dark waters of the swamp. They listen for the heartbeat of sleeping humans, specifically targeting the young or the vulnerable. They slip through open windows or tear through tent fabric, using their sharp talons to rip open the chest cavity of their victims, consuming their hearts to replenish their dark magical energy. Before the first light of dawn breaks over the horizon, the Stikini must return to the tree where they hid their internal organs. They must re-ingest them, sliding the wet, cold organs back down their throat to reclaim their human disguise before the community wakes up. Because of this, the only way to destroy a Stikini is to find their hidden organs while they are out hunting. If a person discovers the hanging heart and lungs and destroys them, or simply coats them in salt or ash so they cannot be re-ingested, the witch is trapped. When the sun rises, the Stikini will be permanently locked in the form of the mutated, dying owl, exposed to the world for the monster they truly are. We have officially survived the Dark Zone. The vast forests and dark swamps of North America are slipping away, and we are finally dropping into the absolute deepest, coldest, and most terrifying layer of our iceberg. Tier 4, the Abyss. Here, we're stepping away from the Hollywood movies, European courtrooms, and internet creepypastas entirely. we are entering the highly respected, deeply feared, and intensely guarded spiritual reality of the Navajo Nation. We're going to look at the true, unvarnished nature of the Nadoshi, the Skinwalker. This is not a story meant to entertain. It is a reality that local communities refuse to speak about out loud. We're at the bottom of the iceberg now, my friends. Tier 4, the Abyss. Welcome to the bottom. The water pressure here is crushing, and the darkness is absolute. Up in the higher tiers, we could comfort ourselves with historical court documents, psychiatric terms, or internet creepypastas. But down here in Tier 4, the campfire stories stop. We are stepping into the living, breathing, and deeply feared spiritual reality of the Navajo people of the American Southwest. Here, the shapeshifter is not a fictional monster, a pop culture trope, or a fun topic for a YouTube video. It is an active, terrifying threat, a subject so sensitive and heavily guarded that even whispering its name is considered a dangerous invitation to tragedy. The Witchery Way. To understand the true horror of the Navajo shapeshifter, we must first shatter the biggest myth of all, the Naldoshi, which translates literally to, by means of it, he goes on all fours. It's not an animal. It's not a cryptid. It's not a virus passed by a bite. It's a human being. In Navajo spirituality, harmony and balance are the guiding principles of life. Medicine people, or singers, spend decades training to use sacred spiritual knowledge to heal the sick, bless the community, and maintain this delicate balance. But this power is a double-edged sword. A practitioner who possesses this profound spiritual knowledge can choose to turn their back on harmony and balance and choose the path of the Witchery Way. These individuals are corrupt former medicine people who have made a conscious, deliberate choice to pervert sacred ceremonies for their own selfish gain, wealth, and destructive power. They are the ultimate betrayal of their community. But to fully initiate into this dark covenant, to gain the ability to strip away their humanity and wear the skin of an animal, the witch must first pay an unthinkable price. They must commit the ultimate, irredeemable taboo. Traditional lore dictates that the initiate must take the life of a close, beloved family member, often a sibling or a child. This act of cold-blooded murder permanently severs their soul from the human collective. It destroys their capacity for empathy, leaving them empty, hollowed-out vessels driven entirely by malice, envy, and a burning hatred for the living. They do not suffer from a werewolf's curse. They choose this. They slaughtered their own blood to become a monster. Clues of the unnatural. If you're traveling through the vast, isolated expanse of the Navajo Nation, through the stark, beautiful mesas and desolate desert highways under a canopy of silent stars, how do you know if you're being watched by a Naldoshi? According to those who have survived these encounters, they don't look like Hollywood beasts. They don't look like the towering, muscular monsters of cinema. They look like an ordinary animal, often a coyote or a wolf or a dog, maybe even a cougar. But if you look closely, you will see that everything about them is wrong. You might see a coyote running alongside your vehicle at 60 miles per hour, but its joints are bending backward, defying the laws of anatomy. You might see a wolf standing in your headlights, but it's balancing effortlessly on its hind legs, its front paws hanging limp like withered human hands. And then there are the eyes. When you shine a flashlight at a normal wild animal in the dark, their eyes reflect the light back in a bright greenish-yellow glow. This is a natural biological feature called the tapetum lucidum. But a skinwalker does not possess this. When you shine a light into the eyes of a Ye Naldoshi, their eyes do not reflect. Instead, they glow with a flat, dull, self-luminous red. And if you dare to lock eyes with them, the illusion falls away entirely. You aren't looking at a beast. You are looking at human eyes, the gaze of an old man or woman burning with an intense, calculated, and deeply sadistic intelligence, and they are mocking you. They know that you're trapped in your metal machine, and they know that once the engine cuts out, you are completely at their mercy. The taboo of the name and white ash. As we close out our descent into the deepest depths of this iceberg, we have to talk about how the living survive in a world where these things walk. If you visit a traditional Navajo community, you will notice a heavy, respectful silence when certain topics are brought up. You do not talk about the Ye Naldoshi with outsiders. You do not talk about them after dark. And you never, under any circumstances, say their true human name out loud. To the Navajo, this is not mere superstition. It is a matter of self-preservation. The belief is simple. Speaking of them draws their attention to you. Thoughts and words have power. When you discuss them, when you analyze them, or when you say their name, you are casting a beacon into the darkness. You're inviting them to find your home, to climb onto your roof in the dead of night, and to peer through your window with those flat red eyes. If a skinwalker targets you, standard weapons are useless. A lead bullet or a steel blade won't do anything but anger the witch. According to traditional lore, there are only two ways to destroy a Ye Naldoshi. The first is the use of white ash. A weapon, bullet, or arrowhead must be dipped in the sacred ashes of a ceremonial fire. Only this purified substance can pierce their unnatural defenses and cause physical harm to the witch. The second defense is far more psychological and far more dangerous. If you're able to recognize the human face of the skinwalker beneath the animal hide, if you know who the witch is in their daily human life, you must look them in the eye and speak their true birth name out loud. If you name them, the dark magic instantly collapses. The curse reverses, turning inward upon the practitioner. Within 3 days, the witch's body will begin to waste away from the inside out, and they will die a slow, agonizing death, finally paying the price for the humanity they so eagerly threw away. Conclusion. So what have we learned today about the terrifying beast known as the werewolf? Well, besides the fact that Hollywood lied to us, silver bullets are expensive, and medieval Europeans had a disturbing obsession with accusing their neighbors of witchcraft, we've learned that the true story is infinitely worse. We've traveled from the bright cinematic lights of Hollywood's tragic cursed victims down through the blood-stained courtrooms of medieval witch trials, across the silent, freezing forests of the early American frontier, and finally into the quiet, heavily guarded spiritual traditions of the Southwest. And what we found at the absolute bottom of this iceberg is a simple, uncomfortable truth. The werewolf, the shapeshifter, the skinwalker, they aren't monsters born of the wilderness. They aren't helpless animals. They are a mirror. They are the ultimate embodiment of what happens when a human being willingly decides to cast aside their soul, their morals, and their humanity, just to feel the thrill of the hunt. Perhaps the most terrifying thing about the beast lurking in the shadows is that it used to sit across from us at the dinner table. Might just be sitting across from you right now. Thank you for sticking with me on this journey into the darkness. If you enjoyed this descent into high strangeness, please take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment. It really does help keep the lights on around here. And if you're a fan of the strange and macabre, which I know you are, check out some of my horror novels. I've written several of them. You can find out more about them at chilledbones.com. So sleep well tonight, my friends. Lock your doors, keep your windows shut. And if you hear something pacing on all fours outside your house in the dead of night, maybe don't look out the window. Just a thought.